think anybody would come. We only organised this a week ago. Thank you so much all for coming. I'm going to dedicate tonight to Riley James, my little nephew, who was going to be here but fell asleep. That's understandable. He's turning 5 soon. And that reason why I would dedicate this event to him will become hopefully clear as we go. Look, this is a story about a city. It's a story about our city. And it's been a bit of a journey for me to discover some of the old names. I have spent most of my life here, arrived here when I was 8 years old, just before my 9th birthday, and realised that I'd got to my mid-20s before I'd heard the word Noongar, or at least connected it to anything. And still don't speak the language, that musical language of this place that we just heard Dr. Wally sing and speak to us before. And in the year 2029, this city will be celebrating its 200th anniversary. And part of this project was to discover and maybe to invent and create what kind of celebration we may be in the mood to have at that stage. Because where we're standing is the site of an unannounced, unacknowledged war against the people who were here, if archaeological records are correct, for 200 times longer than the city's been here. So really what tonight is about is asking ourselves, well, what kind of celebration are we going to be in the mood for by the year 2029? And is the next generation of Noongar kids going to be watching the fireworks from behind bars? Or will they have something to celebrate as well? Will the city be able to feed itself in the year 2029? If the 21st century is the one in which food and water take over from oil as the base commodity that keeps things running, learning a little bit about how the city could or couldn't feed itself under various circumstances has been quite enlightening and quite alarming. So the questions that we're going to ask tonight really are mostly premised on that. Maybe hold that question in your mind. The year 2029, are we going to be in the mood for any sort of celebration, given some of the things that we've already set in motion for ourselves? Where have we been? If we're going to ask the question about where we're heading, it'd probably be good to start with where we've been. So this is the city, sort of sprawling and expanding out from Fremantle and Perth over the last 180 odd years, swarming down the Swan Coastal Plain and creating a place that, according to a lot of global measures, is one of the most livable cities in the world. And this certainly has been a very good town to me. But it is premised on fragile and tenuous global supply chains, and it's premised on cheap petrol. And if either of those two things were to break down for any period of time, things here would go sideways really quickly. As that expansion and that growth, that kind of suburban swarming down the coastal plain, you can see these little fragments, these little bits and pieces in here. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a moment. This is what's happened. This is how it's looked from a little bit closer up. As Butler from 2002, every couple of years, fly a plane over, you can see what's happening, this kind of slow motion swarm. And maybe if we come back in 20 years, it'll be nice to see you all again, and we put the slide up from 20 years' time, unless we actually take a hold of the progression and the growth of the city and the way that it's developing, presumably all of the bushland there, except for a few chopped up fragments, is going to be gone as well. And we know this because if you look at the state planning documents for what's supposed to happen here, it looks a little bit like this. Boom, we plug in another 1 million people and just keep swarming up and down the coast and into the hills. So that's what's in store if we just let it rip. I don't think that's going to happen, and the reason for that is nothing to do with ideology or being a member of the Green Party or anything like that. For me, what really sat me down pretty hard thinking about growth, thinking about the future, was maths, was this old story, apocryphal presumably, of the mathematician who invents the game of chess. And he takes his invention to the Queen of the country, who's so impressed by this elegant invention that she can clearly tell is a big deal, that she asks, how could I possibly repay you, wise mathematician, for an invention like this? And he says, well, I would be pretty happy to be paid in gold, because yes, it is a ripper. It's a very clever thing that we've done here. On the first square of the chessboard, I'd like to be paid just 1 gold coin. And on the second square, I'd like you to place 2 gold coins. Then on the third square, 4. Then on the fourth square, 8. And then 16, 32, 64. And on until you've covered all of the squares, and that will be quite adequate for payment. Thank you. So the Queen sends the Chancellor away, comes back about half an hour later looking a bit white, and it turns out that if you stack up just the coins on the board, just that series of 63 doublings, you end up with this many. I don't even know if there's a number for that. It's a 1 followed by a lot of other numbers. The stack of coins just on the 64th square would reach 300 million kilometres past the orbit of Jupiter. So I don't know whether the mathematician ever got paid or not. So that cute little thought experiment is taught in maths classes to remind maths students that any system undergoing exponential growth will punch a hole through the ceiling of any given problem. Anything that is doubling within a finite period of time will eventually zoom off past the orbit of Jupiter. So what if we weren't playing this game as a maths puzzle? What if we were playing this game with the planet? What if we were playing it with our very own economy? And let's just imagine for a second the chessboard expanding to take up this battered old world. And you play the game with one of the foundation commodities of the industrial age. So it's the year 1904, and Australia has its first Labor Prime Minister. He only lasted a couple of months. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? But apparently he was a hell of a guy. And in that year, you should imagine that orange cube sitting there looking rather suspicious and suspenseful, is 95 million tonnes of iron ore. So that's the total amount of iron ore that the global economy is mining, crushing, shipping, smelting. 95 million tonnes. And then you ask yourself, in what year did the first doubling occur? When does the next stack of coins appear on the chessboard for iron ore? And commodity markets zigzag around the place. This is not a smooth incline. But roughly, rough numbers, 1929, 210 million tonnes, ironically enough, so I was figuring this out, the year of the Wall Street crash, and Mother Teresa sets up her practice in Calcutta. When's the next doubling? 1955, 360 million and a bit tonnes. Menzies is the Prime Minister. James Dean writes himself off in his little car. The next doubling, 1970, the year that they nearly lose the Apollo 13 mission. When's the next doubling? 2006, the year that they hang Saddam Hussein. Just doubling and then doubling again. And if you read the annual reports and the projections of the resource bureaus and the companies and the countries that do this stuff for a living, including a pretty significant industry right here in WA, the next doubling is set for roughly 2031. 5 doublings, you've gone from 95 million tonnes to 3 billion, and you've punched a hole in the ceiling. So, here's the thing. That is premised on a rather harmless, indeed healthy sounding 2.8% annually compounding growth. Buys you that hole in the ceiling after that many doublings. 25-year doubling time. So roughly once a generation, that sector of the economy is twice as aggressive as the generation before. And with each doubling, you use up the equivalent amount of everything that you consumed through all previous doublings. And that's what it looks like. This is Dr. Gavin Mudd, who's compiled what looks like every tonne of every commodity that's ever come out of the ground in Australia. And you can see, I was talking about these zigzags and gyrations in global commodity markets, but you can see that stack of coins just doubling up and doubling up and doubling up. And so China, one of our key export markets, particularly for iron ore, is not doubling at 2.8% annually compounding growth. They've managed to retain these blazing growth rates of 8, 9, 10% for 30 years, and they've pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty along the way, but that's a doubling time of 8 years. What it's also done is really poisoned the air. It's shortened lifespans in northern China by 5 years. It contributes to the early deaths of more than 1 million people a year in China. There's a cost to playing the mathematician's coin doubling game. Naturally, there are benefits as well. But that crap in the air is coal dust from Australian mines, burnt in power stations and smelters, to produce iPods and the camera equipment that we're recording tonight's event with, the mic I'm wearing, a lot of your clothes, cars, and that all arrives in these shipping containers here in the Port of Fremantle. Let's play one last little coin doubling experiment because I think you probably get what I'm on about by now. 1970, container traffic through Fremantle Port, 50,000 containers. 120,000 by the year 1990. This is why Tideman Road's getting a little busy. More than 500,000 by 2010. What does the Port Authority think is about to happen? That. 1.5 million, just keep stacking the coins up. If you live on a high street, you now need to get out of the way. If you're in local government, if you're the Port Authority, state government departments, planners, housing industry, your job when you get there and sit down at your desk every day is to organise for the next stack of coins on the board no matter what. It's true, right? That's kind of, we're all engaged in that in one way or another. And the scary thing is if that coin doubling, that growth stops for more than a few months at a time, we call it a recession. And lots of people get thrown out of work, lose their houses and their livelihoods. And we've premised an economy on this coin doubling game, which effectively tells us that you have to double or die. And we need some other way in the middle because this is happening. You've all seen this graph, right? This kind of zigzag, this inexorable increasing zigzag as the planet breathes through northern hemisphere, summer and winter. And we hit this rather gruesome anniversary of 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere only a few short months ago. That we have done that. Our fingerprints are on that. So we've reached the age of limits. Whether you're a green or not, whether you think climate change is absolute crap or not, it's my instinct, I don't have a clever graph or data to support this, it's my instinct that we're not going to see the next coin doubling, that we've hit biophysical limits, and that it's actually not going to be possible to double up the next stack, and that in fact it's extraordinarily dangerous to try.